so much for coming out today for our lecture. I'm honored to introduce Professor David Heymann, who's here from the University of Texas at Austin. And as a UT alum, my biggest regret is not having David as a professor. So I'm super thrilled to be able to hear him speak all the way here in Lubbock. It's super exciting to have him also because as I have to look at my notes, right? I know, I ruined the short answer. Anyway, he's contributed in and around our profession in a variety of facets. He's an educator, an academic, and an avid writer. He also integrates his research between landscape and architecture within a joint studio that does both architecture and landscape students, which is a pretty awesome way to kind of start.
We've just finished the speed dating exercise.
That's awesome.
Then we forced them together. Forced marriage.
It's even better this way, right? That's how we should start to do it. We should force architects, I don't know where we would go. So sadly, this is a simple question.
Actually, the really reason is we actually had several parents from us to do it again.
Really? Come, look, changing lives one way, one at a time. Two at a time. Okay, well, you know what? This is my favorite introduction I've ever done. So I think without further ado, let's please welcome Professor David Heymann.
So first of all, is this on? Y'all can hear me, more or less? Yes. So thank you for having me. I love being here. I first started teaching at Iowa State, and I very much love plains landscape for a lot of reasons. Actually, I love it because it's actually intellectually really interesting. The challenge of it, because it's something that I particularly like. I started teaching there when I started writing there. There's so much, just flying into it, got me really thinking about a whole series of things. When Jim called and asked me to come and talk in a series about speculation, I jumped at the chance because there's this thing I want to talk about today in my own work, which I'm struggling with. And it has to do with the idea of how sustainability and technologies of sustainability relate to aesthetic experience. It's a struggle, right? And it's this thing that I want to show you in a series of projects the direction I'm thinking about it in. And that's the kind of first thing I want to say about it. I want to start first with this kind of photograph of this urinal to apologize. Like, as those of you're smiling in front of those of you who have ever heard me speak, I will just start blurting stuff out, and I'm a notorious cursor. And I've learned to try to be in control, but so the first thing I want to do is just with this image, just apologize in advance that if I say something that's offensive, it's because that is who I am, relatively offensive. The second thing is, what I really like about this image is how ugly this toilet is. It's truly not that interesting. The reason that it's interesting is because it's arguably sustainable, and sustainability is first and foremost in the present technological revolution. Really profound. It's a tactical. It's certainly not an aesthetic revolution. It's driven by a kind of very direct series of needs that have arguably the best expression of the best resolution in initially technological solutions rather than architectural ones. And these are problems that are best solved by engineers, really, and by architects, certainly, or by manufacturers, rather than, again, an architect. And actually, from that point of view, as an architect, it would not seem, since the pressing issues of sustainability are to a certain degree technical, it wouldn't seem like the aesthetic question is that important. How is sustainable technology experienced? But it is. It is for a number of reasons. The first is that every major technological revolution in the history of culture is followed by an aesthetic one. Shortly thereafter, just not long thereafter. Steel gets in, like massive steel production, and then not long thereafter the rise of the modern skyscraper, the discovery of perspective, the need perspective as a technological representational tool, and then not long thereafter, et cetera, et cetera. The rise of concrete and the Roman arch and so forth. And there's this whole long history. It is true that the history of architecture is often taught as a series of cultural imperatives, but it can equally as well be taught as a series of technical imperatives that then precede cultural ideas. There are some rare examples where that's not true. Michelangelo is probably the only one, or the Baroque, where there's an idea about what needs to happen before the technology arises. But in most cases, technology comes first, and then the culture follows. And that's an interesting thing. I mean, arguably that culture following part, that's the part that architects are good at. You know, and that's the part that I'm actually interested in. It's not that the other part, the technical part, isn't important. It's just that it's not the part that architects are especially capable of, or even that that's their kind of bailiwick. I mean, we had this dean, Larry Speckman. He used to say this thing was really awful, but I want to repeat it to you and tell you the story. He used to say that if you went to Texas A&M, you would learn how to size rebar and put it in footing. And if you went to Harvard, you would never hear the word rebar, and you probably wouldn't hear the word footing. And then if you look 5 years out of school where those people were, the guy from Harvard, the girl from Harvard, would be running a project, and the guy or the girl from A&M would be putting rebar in footing. You know what I'm saying? Like it's slanderous, because there's obviously other reasons why people can go, there are other reasons that control what the decisions other people make. But his point was that if you're in architecture, it is true that you need to know the skill sets. They're not the thing that architecture is actually about. There are actually better people who do the skill sets better, who sign the drawings about the skill sets part. And then where the real potential for you as an architect is in the value part. And that's the really interesting part, the part that gets you through the long years of being an architect. So yeah, so that's part of the interesting, why I want to talk about this particular topic. And then I also want to mention before we go on from this slide that there's this one other thing that I find really disconcerting. Like I'm 57, right? I am clearly on the dinosaur side of this line. You know what I'm saying? Like it's clear that like sustainable technology is going to come along, and it's going to, a generation or two from now, there's going to be really interesting architecture. There's no really interesting sustainable architecture right now. Because the first generation that gets the tool doesn't know what to do with it, or they resist it. It's a little bit like, imagine if you were in school and it was like 1420, and like Brunelleschi was a young professor that had just been hired as a temp adjunct professor, and he comes in talking about linear perspective, and all the professors go, linear perspective, you know, to hell with linear perspective, you know, and they teach history that way. There's all this kind of sad moment right before modernism. You know, there's all those architects that used to get up to the poor son of a bitch because they're going to go down in flames. Same thing right before the Renaissance. There's all this kind of like, the historians always talk about the sad careers they had of wasted because they were on the wrong side of the line. I'm on the wrong side of the line. I'm fairly admitting actually. I'm on the dinosaur, not the mammal side of this particular evolutionary thing. So that's part of the reason why I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you about how me seeing that, what I'm trying to do about the fact that I'm on the wrong side of that line. So here's what I mean about revolutions, the technological revolutions, and how they take time. This is a very famous example. This is pre-Renaissance, early Renaissance, high Renaissance. And there are examples of the use of linear perspective and how it evolves over a series of generations. So this is not yet early Renaissance because it's not in correct space, but it is a format that is true of medieval painting, lateral format. And the reason the lateral format of paintings occurred in Italy in the Middle Ages is that in a church, if you went to church, on the sides of the church, one side the Old Testament, one side the New Testament, all the stories would be told, and everyone was illiterate, there were no books. So the priest, if you go to certain places, you can still see this happening, the priest would use the building as a book to explain to the worshipers how the stories went. So the stories went from left to right. So the spatial organization of the painting is from left to right. Does that make sense? That's a Gothic pre-Renaissance format. And so then here you have Fra Angelico right at the start of the Renaissance, with the kind of proper invention of linear perspective. And what you see is a really beautifully constructed space, but the story and the space of the painting is still this lateral thing. Right? The perspective is the tool that's basically being used to make a pre-existing format just look more correct. Does that make sense? Like this is the dinosaur side of this line, right here. And then here, Da Vinci now fully in the Renaissance. The story's still being told laterally, but it's still in a church. But now you see the idea that deep perspective, this extraordinary threshold that gets made, and that's the eye line that you are on, establishes this really tremendous gulf between the angel on the one hand and Mary on the other, and you perceiving that tremendous threshold through the use of this infinitely receding linear perspective. It tells the story directly to you in a way that's fundamentally unique. It uses perspective as a component of the content of your experience of the thing itself. Does that make sense? That's that. Got it. Okay, now we have the tools in place, and this took about 1333, 1472, 75 years. Does that make sense? So sustainability has risen, things are a little faster now. You know, I'm somewhere here-ish, and this is the problem. I'm interested in that-ish, but I'm stuck over here. Here's another famous example of the history of photography, the invention of the camera. It takes a couple of generations before people begin to understand what you can do with a camera, and what you can do with it well. When photography was first invented, early photographers used Henry P. Robinson. This is composed of many, many negatives. You would take all these different photographs of all these different things and compose them like a kind of Victorian painting in order to try to tell many, many stories. And it wasn't until a couple of generations later, here's Jacques-Henri Lartigue. He took this photograph when he was 13, which is this other hallmark of the evolution of culture. It usually takes younger designers and younger eyes to see the new way to see something. And you're just going, no, what you do with the camera is you can tell stories that you can't really tell effectively in painting. If you painted that, no one would believe they would find it extraordinarily romantic, but as a photograph, it tells you a kind of remarkable story that's really, really kind of powerful and profound. So here, this is Open Dwell magazine, right? Any magazine. And there will be architects like this, and a house like this. It looks like a Breuer house, doesn't look new, but it's, that's Ipe in ash and trained concrete and recycled lumber, and it's to a certain degree sustainable, I suppose. The architects argue for it as a thing that has sustainable aspects to it, but really what it is like that middle painting zone. Right? It's an older idea about how spaces should be made, but it is dressed up in the technology of sustainability. It's not particularly interesting. It's a dinosaur. Right? It will be left behind. Years from now, historians will look back and say that poor son of a bitch. They were on the wrong side of the line. They'll find sadly about that. That's just too bad. If you only been born 10 years later. But this is understandable. I don't mean this I mean it in a kind of shitty way, but I also mean it in a kind of admirable way. You're struggling with real, these are architects struggling with real problems trying to figure out how to make this work. The worst thing is architects congratulating themselves on that, because Breuer did it better, right? I mean, Breuer didn't have to use triple glazing. Breuer had to use single glazing, which meant that you could actually see out the windows instead of those triple glazing with the terrible reflections. So you can't quite see outside so well with it. E-coating that breaks down over time, and then the frit, not the same essential condition, or the fact that, me, you can make a steel beam go from inside to outside. You can't make a steel beam go from inside to outside. You can't even use a steel window because you need the thermal break. You know what I'm saying? So you just try as hard as you can, and you congratulate yourself if you can hide the thermal break. Honestly, I know architects who congratulate themselves for hiding the thermal break. I have members of my faculty who congratulate themselves for hiding the thermal break. I have myself congratulated myself in public for hiding the thermal break and making it look like, you know what I'm saying? It's kind of like it's a fool's game in a way. It's a dissatisfying, kind of shameful work. Don't you think? I mean, I'm happy to talk about other architects, but if I have to tell my mom I did that, she's like, what? Why are you so proud of that? If you can't please your mom, then something's wrong. Desperately wrong. I thought I raised you better. If you look at architecture that's understood to be ambitious, there are a lot of architects whose work seems to be revolutionary in this regard, but it's not. So, for example, many of you know this building by Morpheus. It's quite excellent building, San Francisco Federal Building, which has all these really, really, really remarkable technologies with regard to air conditioning and shading and air movement and passive cooling and heat dumping and so forth. It's a really, really interesting building. And you look at it, you go, there's a pretty profound model of a building which has evolved because of sustainability. But if you look at the work that Morpheus was doing just before they got interested in sustainability, it looks exactly the same. It's something they have to be careful about. Right? It is true that good architects They're really smart about going, I'm not retooling. I'm just going to find a way to take the thing I'm already doing well and move it towards something. Does that make sense? So if you go to look at the Cooper Union building, you know, LEED Platinum, and it is LEED Platinum. They're smart people, right? And again, Foster's a great example. I mean, Foster, they've already got the infrastructure in place to simply add a new set of tests to the testing that we're already doing, right? Testing for solar, testing for heat gain testing, but they were already testing. They're just adding a series of other tests to their formal consideration. And if you look at these architects' trajectories, you couldn't say that these are actually new architectures. Does that make sense? New architectures that arise from the problem of the revolution that will have to happen as a consequence of extraordinary development of sustainable technologies. And certainly there are like really pathetic ones. I only have this up here just because I want to note a complex. This is a separate whole kind of separate important kind of a discourse in architecture that's problematic. You may know this is the back of this book by landform building. The index of landform building is organized by different kinds of types of geophysical movements. The site sloped, or we excavated that, or we did this, right? Yes. Do you use that language? My students do. I mean, I tried to excavate, or I eroded the side of the building. Have you ever said that? I have. I'm embarrassed now. I'm freely standing in front of you saying. So the reason I'm bringing it up is that there's this other sub-discourse in architecture that says that somehow if we behave that way, the buildings will become sustainable. Which is, I just want to note to you, it's actually intellectual nonsense. It is. It's just yes or no. Here's the thing to do at this point. Nod to me. Go, yes, we understand that that's intellectual nonsense. We looked at it in class. We looked at it because we made it like a tree, therefore it's going to behave ecologically like a tree. That's not true. It just doesn't happen. All right. We cool with that? I mean, there are interesting examples. This isn't a mural, to be clear, although it probably is used as a sink in the Sweet Cathedral by Heather. You know, this is one tendency, this is one direction where you go, where a lot of sustainable architecture is tending. It's tending towards exposing something. Does that make sense? That's where the aesthetic direction is going to go. I'm going to explain to you that when you wash your hands, the water is going to go into the sink and into a drain. And I think that there's something to that. Although me personally, I actually dislike that one. That's the part I like the least about me. That you can get points for education. I know this is like almost a crime to say, but here's the reason why I think that. My kids were raised in an era when they were made to feel guilty about the environment. They're your age. Like my kids are in their 20s. Like when we dropped them off at their little elementary school, instead of there being the founding fathers on the kind of front wall of the cafeteria, it was all the penguins of the world. And so they were constantly kind of brought up in this era where they were being heard again and again how precious the environment was. And here's my sense of that. They're sick of it. You're sick of it. You're sick of hearing it out. You're sick of being educated in it. You're to the point where actually you're going, I don't care about this anymore. Does that make sense? So like this thing is nice. But that thing is like your teacher reminding you again that you have to do something. We didn't. You have to. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's your problem now, because we didn't solve it. That's what that thing says to me, you know? It's not really about solving the problem of water, it's about shifting the problem of water onto you, which is just wrong. I mean, that's ethically wrong. That's not intellectually wrong, it's just ethically wrong. I mean, I admire that thing. Ethically, not exactly, I admire it as a form, but ethically, I can't say that I admire it very much, although, I mean, this guy's a genius anyway, don't you think? Yeah, he's getting there, he's trying. I'm not saying, again, I'm not being critical of this architecture. I'm just pointing out where I'm struggling. This is speculations. I'm trying to explain to you where and how I'm struggling with this particular problem. Here's the problem. Here's the gist of the problem. Look at this stuff. Carbon sequestering pavement. What could be more fabulous than that? It's concrete that sequesters carbon. There's the technological revolution for you. It's concrete pavers like this floor. And it's sequestering carbon. It's a better floor. Does that make sense? That's the revolution. The problem with it is it has zero formal consequence. This is the big problem of sustainable totality as opposed to all other revolutions in the history of architecture. If you have steel and a steel I-beam, it has a formal consequence. If you have concrete, it has a formal consequence. If you can suddenly pour a piece of glass this big, that has a consequence that you directly see in architectural form. But if the only change is that it was concrete before and now it's carbon absorbing concrete, then there's no formal consequence to the technological change. And that's generally true in the sustainable revolution. So this material used to off-gas, and who knows where it came from, but now it might be 100% recyclable. You can't tell. Does it make sense? It's the same thing. It still has all of our screws. It's still the same stupid thing. This is the real dilemma at the heart of this particular technological revolution. What is the consequence to the way you think about the main architecture if there's no actual formal revolution at all? I mean, it's a real problem. I mean, here's what I mean. I'm doing this project for these clients, and they're trying to cattle ranch sustainably, which is really, really difficult to do. It's involved entirely redoing their entire ranch, getting the cows away from the stream, dividing the whole field of things up into a series of pie-shaped fields that lead to a surface drainage tank so that the fecal coliform from the cow manure won't get into the stream. And then they have to calculate, since each of those fields has a different exposure and a different soil type, how long the grass can be on there before it seeds and the seeds fall so they reseed and then the cows can eat. Does that make sense? It's an impossible calculation. They've been working on it for years. So I was there and I said, well, let's have a discussion about this thing we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. What's your definition of beautiful? And they said this really great thing. It's stuck with me to this day. It's absolutely spot on. They said, our definition of beautiful is when the coliform count in the stream is low, the ranch is beautiful. And when the coliform count in the stream is high, the ranch is ugly. And then they said this really great thing to me that really put me in my place. They said, why don't you just do whatever you want? You know what I'm saying? You stupid architect, you can't possibly even remotely come close to accomplishing that because your concerns are about things that don't perform that way. Does that make sense? Really, really interesting. They're on the other side of the line, and I'm behind it, and they're telling me, you stupid dinosaur, go ahead and do whatever you want. Really, there's the point, beautiful, not beautiful. Here's the dilemma. How many of you have an iPhone? Yeah, I mean, this is actually a great test. iPhone too, it's already good somewhere. And then how many of you have Cradle to Cradle? Y'all know about Cradle to Cradle? Okay, let me ask you this question. Which of these two things is, as a design is more? You have to vote. Okay, you have to vote. You can't not vote. I want you to decide now. So your right hand, if you think this is more beautiful, go ahead and make your right hand into a fist. Commit to it. If you think this is more beautiful, your left hand. Right? As a design, which of these two things is more beautiful? How many of you think the iPhone is more beautiful? Come on, get your hands up. How many of you think the iPhone is more beautiful? As a thing, as a design thing. And how many of you think this thing is more beautiful? Yeah, just 2 or 3 people in the room. This is the problem with the dilemma. So here's Cradle to Cradle, which many of you don't know, you should know. Is this book by William McDonough, Michael Brown, but mostly about McDonough as an architect. And the book itself is entirely, his argument is that recycling is a problem. It just slows down the track of something to waste. So that Patagonia jacket made of recycled plastic that you so proudly wear, I do. That's actually just slowing down the problem that's not changing the problem. What we really have to do is reconceive entirely of what things are made of so that they go through a full cycle. And he's developed, for example, carpets that when you buy the carpet, you buy a contract that allows you to entirely reuse the carpet entirely. They take it, they break it down, they remake more carpet, and it's designed to the only waste product is pure water. It's really remarkable. It's pretty ugly, the carpet. It's not especially handsome in a traditional sense. It's not like raised, beautiful pile, pashmina wool that's been hand knotted by it. You know what I'm saying? It's got a good look, right? This book is the same way. It's entirely printed on a kind of plastic that when you're done with the book, you can send it back to the publisher. And they take that plastic, they re-break it down, and reprint it with no waste except for water. It's completely remarkable. It's 100% not recyclable, but what he calls cradle to cradle, it just keeps going. The only byproducts are byproducts of water and air. It's remarkable. The ink is a kind of ink that's made of this. You can take it, swim it in the water, you take the pool. It's a really remarkable book, but it's about how that. On the other hand, this has been noted that Apple, this is the iPhone 5, this is an old slide. I mean, you all know this, that famously, of course, it's a beautifully designed thing, but it's, the making of it is environmentally disastrous. Right? I mean, the rare earth metals that it takes to make it. So we all know this. It's just that the reason we don't care about it is this is happening in China. Right? It's basically, it's all that rare, all that land is being overturned, and the pollution is just staggering what it takes to get the rare earth metals to make this. And then the social cost, many of you know what social cost of making the iPhone Foxconn was made. I mean, it's changed recently, but it used to have the highest suicide rate from any workplace in the world because of the demand to get more iPhones to people like me. I want my iPhone now. Why is it not here now? All right, so here's the problem. The problem is, knowing that, the iPhone's still probably more beautiful for most of them, you know what I'm saying? Like, here's the funny thing. If you tell this to high school children, they're going to that's more beautiful, really fast. This is a really good test of where on the dinosaur line you are. If you're across the dinosaur line, this is more beautiful for you. If you're not, this is more beautiful for you. This is a really good test of your own, a good place to struggle with. That's so beautiful. It is beautiful, don't they? It's a real problem. But this is the problem. This is the gist of the problem. It's even more. The gist of the problem is that. Let's go to the next slide here, please. Yeah. The gist of the problem is this. You cannot know from the form of the book that it is more beautiful. You can only know after you're told. This is the big problem with the notion of aesthetic experience in the coming sustainable realm. This thing is beautiful because of its form, and you can perceive it without having to be told what it is or why it's beautiful. But this thing, you have to be told that it is beautiful. This is a really horrible thing about not having a formal component. It means that in order to engage aesthetic experience in architecture, you have to have a kind of trigger. Does that make sense? That idea? It never was true before. If you walked into a Baroque church, you were swept up. You didn't need to have someone tell you this is a profound emotional experience, because you were having a profound emotional experience. You were like, shut up, I'm having a profound emotional experience. Whereas with this, someone has to tell you that it's beautiful, and you get it, you go, yeah, it's beautiful. You're right, it's beautiful. I mean, it's really beautiful. Now I understand its beautifulness. It's not beautiful, but it's beautiful. You know what I'm saying? It's like an ugly cat, is what we call it. Ugly cat. You go to the door, the pound, you get a kitten. A strange mixed parentage, part dog. Its tail has been broken. You know, you take it back home, half of its face is bald. You love it to death. You love it, love it, love it. You raise it, you care for it, and eventually it becomes beautiful in your eyes. Does that make sense? It's a beautiful thing. And someone comes in and says, it's the ugliest cat I've ever seen. And then you hit them. Because that's the trigger. Right? They go, now it's beautiful. You're right, it's beautiful. And you have to threaten them to tell them the story. Right? It's so frustrating as an architect, that idea. You have to tell a story in order for something to be beautiful. It undercuts this fundamental dimension of your right as an architect to shape the space of the world. I mean, that's now the dilemma for me that I'm trying to do with the memo. Does that make sense? So I want to show you some examples of how that plays out in my work. Oh, this is what I meant about the ugly cat. You guys know a lot about the house of Kieran Timberlake? It is the ugliest, beautiful house there is. That's the way I describe it. It's an ugly cat. It's like a cat from a pound. That's it. What I describe it. It's the only way to love it. Or do you really like it? With this big, red and gray, funky, ugly. And this loss of nerve, set of decisions over here. And then it really looks like it was designed by a group of people. All of them had a good idea about a small piece of it, but they're together, and it's beautiful in that kind of strange way. Ugly cat. Ugly cat. Ugly cat. So, to be clear, the history of culture, here's another word. The history of culture doesn't have a lot of things that you can look at where a trigger enacts an emotional experience. Does that make sense? Like, here's what I'm thinking. I'm going, okay, I think I've got a problem figured out from the point of view of aesthetics. For me, at least. I'm trying to figure out how to make a trigger work in a thing. And so then I go looking for what are there out there in the history of culture are things that work that way. There's not many. Here's one. This is this famous piece by Marcel Duchamp. He bought this urinal, he signed his name, another name on it, and he turned it into an exhibition. And it became notorious instantaneously. No work, but it became, the trigger was sort of the idea. Does that make sense? Like it's a thing that has tremendous impact without really having, I mean, you go there and you're offended, and then someone has to explain to you why it's art. It is what it great art. The marketplace has spoken. I mean, these things, if there was another one available, would be worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Even though it costs Duchamp nothing to make. It's a modern paradigm. Zero labor, zero materials, all inspiration. Awesome. You know what I'm saying? It's really spectacular. I love this thing. But it's a really good example of the thing we have to be told. I mean, I'm looking at you guys are pissed off. You're going, I got to work hard, and he just signed a urinal, and he's making, yeah, that's what he did. But to use for example, a urinal, a trigger, right? It triggers you, it triggers at least some experience that it does so by being wrong. Does that make sense? This is the important part. The trigger here isn't that it's correct. It isn't actually that someone is standing alongside and explaining to you what the urinal is. It's that you're like, what the hell is this urinal doing here? Does that make sense? Like it's initially incorrect, and that's the triggering mechanism. Yes? I mean, here's another example. These are just famous photographs by Sherry Levine, where she would photograph. These are these great photographs by Walker Evans that he took during the Depression. It was paid for the Federal Services Administration. And they're in the Library of Congress. So Sherry Levine went to the Library of Congress with the same camera and took the photographs out. And she photographed them with the same size camera and reprinted them the same size and then framed them and hung them in galleries. Does that make sense? And they sell for millions of dollars. They're spectacularly beautiful, even though there's no real work involved. Does that make sense? The work here is consuming the thing itself. The trigger is, you see a Walker Evans photograph, but the name is shared, the name there is shared with you. You go, wait, that's wrong. There's something wrong there, and then you begin spiraling down into doubt. It's the only one I can really think of. I mean, within architecture, there aren't a lot of examples. We're building maybe one, sort of. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not really a building. It scares the hell out of everybody. You know, it's a cloud. It's got issues going on there. You know what I'm saying? You're like, that's not a building. And then you get into a fight with your mom. You know, that's not a building. Yes, it is. It's not a building. Yes, it is. I'm having a good time. You should be having a good time. It's about the world going to hell in a handbasket. But no, it's not. It's all right. It's the kind of thing that generates without even needing to. I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like, plus, when it came out, I don't know, when it came out when I was a professor, a young professor, and like the progressive architecture arrived in the offices, and there was a professors and they were all standing around, and they either said one or two things. They either said, I wish I'd done that, which was true for me, I wish I'd done that. Or they said, I already thought of that. Which is really interesting to me. But it's one of those things that has this kind of idea about it, right? This kind of radical wrongness of it. Or you use the trigger some thinking on your part about the status of nature, the environment. You know, is this an oil rig or a cloud maker? Is it a nuclear device or all those things begin to come into your mind in some way and affect your aesthetic experience? It's not meant to be positive, it's meant to be doubtful. Or here, I mean, this is closer now, this is Todd Williams and Village Inn. It's quite remarkable though in the auditorium in Cranbrook. I don't know how many of you have seen it, but what's really remarkable here is that the skylights here, they open. They're open most of the year because it releases the heat load of the building. And so you're swimming inside, but then you look up and you see a bird fly by. It's really freaking strange. It's wrong. You know what I'm saying? Like it has that wrongness that begins to engage. Or yeah, I'll skip over this. You guys know this one. I'll show you now my own. So I want to show you, these are great projects, but I want to show you the triggers at work. So this is the first one. This is a house in Houston, the Craven's residence in Houston. And the trigger here is, it's in Western University, which is a really nice, very traditional kind of upper middle class and upper class neighborhood, big houses, green lawns. And the trigger here is this yard. This is the yard. So it was a green lawn, and the thing that we did was we planted this ridiculous forest as densely as we possibly could. You know, all the native species raised up, good, and the house was pushed back as far as it could possibly be. But the trigger was just, as you go through the neighborhood, there's something wrong. Does that make sense? The house, there's rainwater collection, solar, blah, 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 does all the technical stuff. But it's meant to sort of be disruptive as you ride through the neighborhood, right? It was meant to have some other triggers on it. I'll show you another picture of it. I'll show you there's a couple of other triggers that I think are triggers. It has some obvious ones. This is all the rainwater coming down, which is less good of a trigger for me. That's more like a sing at the, does that make sense? Like it's a thing that's didactic, as opposed to terrifying. More terrifying, which I like better, is a trigger used in a lot of buildings, which is these tremendous overhangs that are so high up that you can't see them. Does that make sense? They're out, you just calculate that. They're out of your normal range of vision. And so they put you in shadow. So when you're outside, you're in the shade, even though you can't see the thing that's putting you in the shade. Does that make sense? It's a funny kind of trigger. I mean, when I was growing up as a little kid, the sun was good, and then later on it became evil. And so, like, for you all, it's evil. Your parents dipped you in sunblock when you were children, right? They didn't peel up to their whole, you had to get the giant mold, and you have a good now. You know what I'm saying? Like, they trained you. But that idea that the trigger is this shade is an idea. There was one more trigger that was supposed to happen on this house that we argued and argued and argued for. It's a funny story because it didn't happen, and then some other collateral damage happened. So the idea was that if we had this garden, that we could put an outdoor shower on the front of the house. They're saying like a trigger, like for the owner, it's this kind of risk that you take. You've committed to the garden, and then you go shower in it, but you're essentially in the public realm. And you invert the whole idea of nature, the city, the environment, so it's a kind of trigger, a really good experience. And the client just didn't quite get there, which is fine. So it wasn't fun, a little bit interesting. So we put the client, the outside shower on the back porch, just on the back, under and built a fence around it, and we thought that was the end of it. So this year, I teach Theory 1 to incoming graduate students. I was describing this house to the students, and this guy goes, wait, is that Sunset Salani? I go, yeah. He goes, oh my God. Because I grew up in the bedroom and looked down on the porch and I saw her showering every day. And he goes, no, the fence wasn't high enough. Oh, you totally traumatized my entire youth. Oh, so sorry. Here's a more recent house. This is a really strange house. And it's got strange triggers. There's a couple of them. So this is a 12,000 square foot house for one man and 2 cats. So it's a kind of perverse kind of guys tend to get a lot of. But to his credit, he bought 13 lots, an entire subdivision, and turned it into a nature reserve. Right? He rolled it into a nature easement, took all the development stuff off there. This is my dean and former dean and thought was forever. He's like, it's a bad idea. You made a nature easement. What do you want? And they're going to be 13 starter mansions or one supersized thing. And it does all the kind of normal stuff. So it's divided into all these kind of like sub-units that cross ventilate, and it's got geothermal systems, and it's powered by solar, and blah, blah, blah. And all that stuff is straight up not that interesting because you can't experience it. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't drive. There's a couple of things you can experience. So one of them is, it's not shown in this photograph, this is one of the truths. It's that this particular client likes to stay very late and drink and gamble. And he does all the time. He always wants to go over and drink and gamble. I did it the first couple of times and then it stopped. It ruins your work. It's like going to school at Tulane. You can't actually get anything done. All the professors are drinking and all the students are drinking. Anyway, the trigger, not really true here, actually. The trigger is that, the first trigger is this little pool. It's actually this thing right here. So there's a big kind of open house and it mixes solar bowls and blah, blah. Does all kinds of other stuff. And here's when it opens up and all these walls just roll open and cross ventilate the whole thing. Into this guy's back, he actually cross ventilates, which is really, really nice. But the first trigger is this. So what happens is in the morning he comes down and he's hung over. And there's a pool that ends right here that's just not deep enough to drown me. Does that make sense? Like he just lays there and he kind of recovers. And he just can't drown it. I think it's 6 inches, a little less than 6 inches. When we work on it with him, we just it's nothing bad. And then what happens is that this thing right here, it casts a shade lane right here every day of the year between 11 and 1. And it's very carefully calculated. So every day between 11 and 1, he's got very fair skin, right, and red hair. So every day between 11 and 1, he rolls out of that dream, and he does his laps. Sometime between that thing. Does that make sense? So it's this kind of strange trigger. It allows him, his friends are out here getting melanoma, and he's just like swimming back and forth and inside that hole. So he's got this large thing, and this very strange behavior, and that strange behavior, not strange, his behavior, it for a moment locks into some order of the sun and its relationship to the turning of the earth. Here's an even better trigger in that house. It's my favorite one of all the ones I've done. So I mentioned to you that he likes to stay up late, and he doesn't sleep very well. And he has this room in the house called the insomnia room. And it's where he goes, and he has this immense TV, right here. It's as large a TV as I've ever seen. And it sits in a room that looks out over Austin, right? So this section of this thing is developed to bring that view closer towards you. And then on the back side of it, there's a closet. It's a very long closet. It's his girlfriend's closet. He's had various girlfriends over the process of the time I've known him. He himself only has 3 linear feet of clothing. He's like one of those tech guys. He is a tech guy. And he only wears blue shirts and blue jeans. And he has like 5 blue shirts and 5 pairs of blue jeans and 3 pairs of Nikes. And that's all he has to ever wear to anything, like even the White House. That's how much that sucks. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have to wear a suit. He's just like, White House. White House. Anyway, so this is the girlfriend's closet. And then behind the girlfriend's closet, that's the hallway back to the master bedroom. And then that's this bay window. And you can see the bay window's popped out. You can't really see the slot that's lined with slate. Here's the rainwater coming down this foundation to say that's going to set anywhere on the building. Here's the rainwater coming down, the rainwater goes back around the top. The rainwater back goes to pipe. So the way this thing works is, it's got these high windows. They have this over the closet, and this thing is facing absolute west. Like just, I mean, that was the super survey we had done. This is absolute correct west. And what happens is, like, he likes to watch football with his friends, and they'll be over and they'll be here watching football, and they're looking at Austin. And this wall right here, if it's a really great sunset, what happens is the color of that sky begins to bounce down this thing, and it begins to light that wall up quite brightly. And so it becomes a kind of competing screen with the television. Does that make sense? So it's really good. You can't go, you have to turn the TV off, because it's really profound. I mean, it's really beautiful. You're like, wow, we gotta go look at the sunset. Instead of, we gotta stay here through the Giants Cowboys because it's for, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's that. And then the way it works is that you either come out and sit in this bay window if it's cold outside, or if it's not, which is not that often, you sit in this porch. And at the back of this porch, there's a stone bench. And this handrail is dead center west, right? It's right in the middle. And what happens is if you sit in the middle, if you line yourself up with that thing, on the shortest day of the year, December 15th, the sun sets against the horizon, against that line right there. And on the longest day of the year, 15th of June, the sun sets exactly, if you're sitting on that bench, against that line right there. Does that make sense? So it's this very powerful idea about trying to connect this normative behavior to one that begins to get you spiraling thinking about nature, the universe, the status. Does that make sense? As a trigger? All right. I'll show you a couple more. I'll show you, and then I want to show you a building I just finished and talk about problem we have, one last problem we have. So some of you know I did this house years ago, in 2001, for George W. Bush when he was the governor of Texas, House of Coffee. And at the time it was built, it was the absolute limit of what you could do in normative construction, sustainability-wise. Right? It is normative construction, I mean 2x4 walls, standard concrete foundations. There's no, the technologies are in place. It's normative construction. Any contractor can do it. It doesn't require, there's some steel, but it doesn't require that much. And it is literally a house you can take off the grid. It's not off the grid because of the Secret Service. The Secret Service doesn't want it off the grid for reasons I don't know. But I want to talk about, I want to describe the house to you a little bit and show you the triggers in it. So it basically is a long model here. Does that kind of thing. This is south, so it makes a summer bowl. It's traditional passive strategy. More or less one room wide. If it's not one room wide, you can cross ventilate. And to move around this house, this is the first trigger. To move around this house, you have to go outside and go between rooms. So if you're in the living room and you want to go to the bathroom, you have to go outside and come back in again. And if you're in the bedroom and you want to go to the living room or the kitchen to get a cup of coffee, you have to go outside. So you move along the porch. Well, there's a little bit of hall area here, and that's actually the service of interior caterer more than anything else. But everywhere else you have to move. If you're a guest, here's the living room, there's the kitchen, there's a bathroom right here, this is outside part of here. If you're a guest, you move out and around, and you move down the lawn. And there are these walkways that are either tangent to or aimed at the various trees on the side. So this is the first trigger. The first trigger is that you constantly have to go outside, so you're always reminded of what temperature it is. Right? It's warm inside, so you go outside, it's cold, it's hot, it's warm, it's not. But that thing is actually, the argument between those two ideas, the temperature inside and the temperature outside, is kind of a trigger there. Here's the basic section of the house, the kind of formal wall that sits on kind of a beautiful slope, and the slope, this is high clay soil. So we were looking for a site that's slightly elevated because the surface drainage here is just a nightmare. I mean, it's like we stand there in the rain and it just washes across your feet. So we found a site that was slightly higher as a consequence of the fact that there was a grove of oak trees there that were holding dirt against erosion. And so they were a little island that was slightly higher, and that then became the kind of site of the house, which then took its approximate sectional idea from the rough elevation of the perceived elevation of these trees, the limbs that hang down. Here's more or less how the house, this is one of the public rooms. Most of the rooms, this ganglia truss just goes straight across, and then there's the height. The height is established by, this is your sitting eye height, and that's your standing eye height, and that's a kind of module. And then the doors are this tall, and above it's a transom, because you have this weird situation where people walk by your bedroom, so if you want to cross ventilate, you have to have a high transom instead of just throwing the doors open. Although lately they just throw the doors open, but the kind of really interesting social compact has developed where people walk quietly past each other's bedrooms. It's really nice. As opposed to, does that make sense? No, yes, no, sort of. Really beautiful idea. Here's that. So then, this is the rainwater gutter. So the house is pushed down. This is the radical thing, the other trigger. This is the first trigger. The second trigger is the rainwater gutter. The whole house is pushed down into the ground. The rainwater gutter is actually at grade, which is not a good idea. I'll tell you why in a minute. It's a very old idea. You see it at the Katsura Imperial Villa, which is where I got the idea, and never told bushes that it was coming from the Katsura Imperial Villa. I mean, it's such a beautiful idea that the water runs off and it runs through the ground, it's trenching the ground, it drains the water, and so forth. The reason it's not a bad idea, it's hard to do. The reason it's a bad idea is that we miscalculate slightly, because you're thinking, okay, how far in a windstorm can the wind blow back? Does that make sense? And you're thinking, oh, it's falling really fast, even if I'm going, it can't go that far back. But it's not, that's not the water problem. The problem is that the water that's coming off the roof is dripping off here at zero. Does that make sense? Just technically, for those geeks that you in the audience, the technical problem is that this water that's just dripping off, it blows back relatively easily. It didn't quite make it deep enough, even though we did mock-ups and so forth. But it still works, especially when you're gentle. It works really well. Here's that rainwater trench. It starts low, and then by the time it gets all the way around the back of the house, it's actually very, very deep. It's filled with concrete blocks turned sideways and doesn't have mesh on it. That thing stores about 44,000 gallons, or 24,000 gallons, and there's a cistern that stores another 44,000 gallons. And the way the sprinkler system works here, it's another trigger. The sprinkler system is set up with there's three sprinkler systems. They're fed by different parts of the water well. So it's nothing to do that. This is the way it was designed. It's no longer that way. I'll tell you how it was designed. It was designed so that depending on how much rainwater you have, you could irrigate a larger area. Does that make sense? So the area around the house, the amount of green that was there would just be this thing that was either a lot or a little or nothing, like 3 bears in building blocks. And again, not pedantic, but just this kind of sense of where your oasis was was a kind of register somehow of what was going on in the atmosphere. Here's the site plan as it's set out. So yeah, here's that porch as it works its way around. Works its way along. It breaks through the house at various points. At those points, there are screen porches, and the screen porches get glazed in the wintertime just to make it slightly more habitable. They have radiant heaters and so forth. It's sensitive push down into the ground. And then these are just kind of beautiful spaces. And this is, at one end, and this is sort of the idea. I mean, the idea here has to do with their particular lives. I mean, their lives are very strange. I would describe their lives as living on pudding. That they're always walking on something uncertain, that everyone is being, it's uncertainty to everything they do. This is not just true for the Bushes, it's true for all politicians, for politicians' life, right? You're never sure why you're being glad-handed for some favor. And so the idea of the house was that its program was to offer concrete experience. And the basis of concrete experience was the natural world. And so that even a thing like a rainstorm was a good thing as opposed to a bad thing, was a thing that you could realize. So that part of the idea of the house, of this cantilever porch and these suppressed rainwater barriers, that when it rains, the rain dripping off the roof makes another whole suite of rooms around the house. And this is the public one. This is the great room of the house. This is a porch. This is a cantilever 16 by 40. And then when it's just dripping rain, it makes a spectacular room where 3 sides of the room is just this dripping water. And then the 4th side of the room, it looks real normal, but the 4th side of this room is a big fire. This is a pretty profound trigger in that sense of engaging that kind of content. I'll show you more. There are more crazy little stupid things in this house. There's tons of them. I'll show you a couple more. I mean, one of them is there's actually no proper doors. There is a proper front door in this house. There wasn't until the elder Barbara Bush, the grandmother, came over and she said, "Your house has to have a front door." And they're like, yes, they must have decided to get a front door into the house that no one ever uses. They use it to get to the stereo, which I really like. They use it. All the other doors, all the other rooms are doors. There's no, like, this is one of the bedrooms. You can open it this way, you can open that. You can just walk out. Right? And the idea that the house functions that way. This is another kind of trigger window. This is a window in the bathroom, and I really like it. So it's this kind of translucent part, and then a clear part. And the sink is right behind it. And it triggers a little stupid small one. It is that when you wash your face and you look up, instead of seeing yourself like in a mirror, which all other mirrors do, you see outside. It's a very minor thing. Like a very small adjustment of expectation that then has the potential to alleviate one set of values in favor of another. Does that make sense? Here's let's show you this detail. I love this detail. This is like for me that, like, again, this is now really arcane. This is the thing that I really love and all my friends really hate. It's this piece of wood right there. It's this piece of trim. Like, so the way this works is that the gang trusses go through and they're held up like flitch beams, 2x7s, 2x8s, 2x7, with a piece of steel in between. And that's then the trim size here. Like, the reason they hate it is because it's not modern enough. If it were modern, that piece of trim wouldn't be no trim here at all. That door would just go up into the ceiling. And the space from out there, and the ceiling would go through. Does that make sense? That means that you all want to make, all my students want to make, we've trained all our students to make. Yeah, but instead what's going on here is that this bit of trim, which is the kind of proper part of a wall, right? It acts as a kind of like a little policeman between inside and outside. Does that make sense? There's no other way to explain it. Like, it's meant to act like a little border guard. This kind of crazy decorative piece. There's other nice things about it. There's the way this works is that there is a stud wall, and then the screen porch is on a pocket door. And then it's another stud wall with a steel door in it, and the steel doors are there because it has the most glass that you can get. Does that make sense? You get more glass than steel than you can in the other kind of door. So it allows you to have as much of a view as you can without screen. Right? So the screens have to get out of the way so the windows are as clear as they can. Does that make sense? That's an agenda. So they roll back and give you this nice thick wall, and then when you open those doors, they roll out, and you get this beautiful thick wall. The consequence of that, this is again another kind of triggers, the idea of taking this very normal, proper, vertically proportioned window or door that most architects hate, you know what I'm saying? Like, yes, no, it's very proper anything. You probably don't have any projects. You want them to be horizontal. You know? I do too. But in this case, they couldn't be because it's a very proper house. Trying to trigger other things. So it's essentially taking this thing, and then the way the house gets laid out, the way the elevations get laid out, is for every set of these doors, the screen doors go in, then there's a king post with a gap for electricity. King post, gap, king post. Right, so the flitch beams are standing to that post. This is then the pocket and the pocket. So what you get is as much window as you can possibly have. Does that make sense? Through this system. Like if you take this kind of normative house, normative, very proper, vertically proportioned room with French doors, and you say, how can we end up being as much glass as it possibly can be? This is the system that gives you, and so then you get this profoundly strange. If you look at this room, it's like a room with dilated pupils. Does that make sense? Like a normal room with over large pupils, like one of those strange kind of cap things, you know, like a big eye thing. You know? And that's because the windows they're bigger than they should be. They're as big as they possibly can be in this house, as a kind of way to try to get that same triggering to happen. There's other stuff. It's nice details. I mean, this is the boring parts. I'm interested in the boring parts. This is the part I'm not interested in. Sort of like this is that stuff, Luther's rough backstone, right? Which you can use it all over the place now, but at that time it was considered waste stone. It's from axis, it's about 18 inches thick. It's got the red on the top and red on the bottom. And they used to cut that red off and throw it away because the middle part is like tofu, and it's really lovely stone carved. So we just, for nothing, got all this stone. It's all waste stone. It's just the cost of hauling it over. And then they set it up real nice, and they just set it up and then they ran a saw along the opening. All right, I'm going to show you one more building. This is actually a disappointing building for me. It's a really strange building. You may like it better, but I like it less. It's a painting studio for George W. Bush. I just finished it. Like some of you may know, it's like since he's been in retirement, he's been painting like crazy. He paints like crazy. It's really upsetting. He paints like 8 or 9. I mean, upsetting as an architect because he's trying to do the punch list. And he's got paint all over him. And there's paint on the toilet. And there's paint on the sink. And you're trying to get the contractor to finish up the work, and there's paint everywhere. You know, you're like, it's impossible. So I'll show you the studio that's here. It's a really nice building. It's again, from a geothermal, straight up, this thing functions like it's not, none of these things there's two frustrations about work with the Bushes. One is we're not allowed to do post-evaluation. Energy use is post-evaluation, because that all goes through security. They don't want you to know. So they're really upsetting. So I don't know how it functions. All the calculations say that these buildings function really extraordinarily. So the basic concept of it is my wife's a painter, and I mean, we're good. I mean, you know, we're on the left side of the line because of the environment. So we figured out this, but we're good friends with the Bushes. And my wife, who's especially extreme, she's a good friend of his, and they fight all the time about painting. You know, actually, the last time we were there, oh my God, I looked over and they were standing talking in the field, and she was slapping. And I was like running over because the Secret Service had under bushes and so that machine is really terrifying, right? And she was like, wow, wow. And they'd been arguing so intently about painting that he'd been standing on a fire ant bed. He was covered with fire ants. She was actually slapping fire ants and trying to kill us. Anyway, she pointed this thing out. She goes, he's kind of like when he works, he's kind of like a golden retriever. You know, like he's super intent on what he's doing. And, you know, he's just like kind of super fun. And he works really intensely, right? But then he's very easily distracted. He's like, here's the people. Right? And the notion of the golden was to kind of make a place where you can paint. No shit. If you can paint some good paintings, you know? I don't know. Anyway, so the idea of it is that it's basically this kind of solid thing that has a kind of light device in the middle. The light device is a kind of double-sided hoodie, faces south and faces north. And inside it is computer-controlled LED lights. And so the light inside there is the same all the time. All day, every day. Does that make sense? You turn the lights on there, it's a computer controls, and it's always white light, white daylight, no matter what time of day. And that thing is then surrounded by this kind of protective device that keeps him from being distracted, like one of those things on a golf ball. And then it's got a couple of openings that allows him to see certain crucial things. Like this door allows him to see the cistern from the old house, which is where everyone gathers because that cistern is warmer in the winter and cooler in the summer. So all the chairs are outside. It's really beautiful. And then this one lets him look at that porch that I just showed you where the rain thing is. Right. If there's something going on that room. And the whole backside is open because it looks out at nothing. Found nothingness. And then it's set at this distance between these trees. It's nice. Nice and clean. We're just about done. Here it is. These are relatively recent photographs. Here's the section. So there's that collar. And then you can see that it's not actually set up, it's not set up entirely out. What this section doesn't show is the arc of the sun. And so there are these fins, and the fins actually do a whole lot. It keeps the sun at the hours that he's there. And then it opens up to the north. So you can see one thing about this section that is really important. There's nothing about this section that's particularly environmental. You know what I'm saying? Like actually what's really interesting about this, and what I dislike about this section, is that in the interim between the time we first built the house and now, all of these technologies have developed that allow you to actually begin to ignore the problem. Does that make sense? Like, so when we built the house, you get double glazing. But now you can get quintuple glazing. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can, that problem of having to have an overhang and having to not get the sun through the window, that's not a problem. You just get better glass. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's just, problem with air conditioning, better insulation. Problem with generating power, more solar. Deeper, you know what I'm saying? Well, I look at this building. I like it. There's some things about it I like. I like this particular trigger right here. This is this, all the rainwater comes off and gets carried and diagonal thing. But actually, this building, I find it slightly shameful. Here it is inside. There's that thing, the white thing. Here it is recently. I mean, it's nice. Do you think? I mean, it's nice in a kind of way that I find really appalling. You know, like, because it actually, it's getting this, it's taking my back in this direction that I don't want it to go. Which is like, here, and you see these two buildings. Like this building, this is a really strange building. To me, it's not the most beautiful building. It's got ugly aspects to it in terms of how it developed and how it worked. And then this one is much more like this kind of conventional idea about what architecture should look like now. And I can do it again because now the materials are there again to allow me to do the thing that I shouldn't have been doing in the first place. Does that make sense? Yeah. So that's where I am. That's sort of that's the end of this talk. I mean, there's speculations. I'm grateful for your attention. If you have questions, I'm happy to answer them. And I think this is the last one. Yeah, this is the two buildings. Yeah. Let's go back to that one. It's a nice room. I'll end there. Thank you very much. If you have questions, yeah, I'm happy to answer them.
I have two questions. At the beginning, you talked about how you thought that sustainability was primarily a technological set of problems. And I think especially this second half of your talk here, it sure looked like you thought of it as something bigger than technology, including technology, but a bigger issue. That was good to see, I thought. But in the first half, you talked about how triple glazing has lots of reflections, and you couldn't do steel beams from the inside to the outside because of thermal break problems and so on, and talked about all these important formal attributes of it. Then a few minutes later, you showed concrete pavers that entrapped carbon in them, and sort of said, oh well, there isn't any formal, zero formal consequences for that. So I'm a little confused by the contradiction here.
So I appreciate that. Like, if I understand the question, that's a really great question. There are formal consequences if you're trying to take those materials and make an architecture which wasn't sustainable to begin with, sort of, right? And there are some formal consequences. Although in truth, you have to work to repress them, right? You don't, like, this has to do with the idea that says that if you're taking an existing model and trying to apply a new technology to it, the very last thing that you want to do is let the new technology ruin the model. So if you're trying to make a very modern looking house, and you have to have a thermal break, you don't celebrate the thermal break because that would upset the idea of the formal house. Does that make sense? Whereas if you were really a modernist, you would celebrate the thermal break that you're building that would no longer look like the model that is currently the one that's desired. So you're right, there are formal consequences, but they're not really ones that are liberative. That was the kind of larger point about I mean, I don't know of a great thermal break house. You know what I'm saying? Like, I know there's a great steel house, there's a great stone house, I can't think, there's the great thermal break house, there's the great low flush toilet house. You know, the house that expresses low flushness in a way that is truly liberative. And that partly has to do, the point I was making about the carbon, was that it partly has to do with the fact that the actual thing that you're trying to celebrate is not a form. Right? It is a way of the construction or the technology behind that form. But that technology really doesn't have that much formal consequence. It really doesn't have that much. You're right that it has some, but it's not liberative in the sense of all of a sudden we have a steel frame, or all of a sudden we have large pieces of glass. I mean, really what we're talking about is this thing having a piece of rubber in the middle of it. Right? And you can't really expose it, because if you expose it, then you ruin its capacity to do the thing that you're doing. Does that make sense? Right? I mean, the larger dilemma is that, generally speaking, the vast technological revolutions are improvements in existing material types, or improvements in existing forms of assemblies, or improvements in existing material assemblies or where they're from, rather than such new technologies that they profoundly alter the way we make architecture. Does that make some sense? I mean, I can't think of some. There are some, obviously, solar collections, one. Right? Like if you say we're going to generate energy by solar collection by wind power, there are theoretically some theoretically formal consequences. There could be. It's kind of hard to argue that there have been great examples yet. Does that make sense? There hasn't been a great example of a solar farm that you really want to go see for spatial reasons, as opposed to simply going and seeing it for its technological benefit. So that's the dilemma. As opposed to, at the start of the modern, with the arrival of the steel frame, you suddenly have a magnet building, you suddenly have quite exceptional buildings that people are going to see because they're revolutionary new kinds of space. I guess that was the larger point here. That's the first question. I don't know if I fully answered it. What the second question is, you have a second question.
Well, the first point that I was making, you talked about technology first, and then sort of demonstrated in the design of this building and some others that it's about sustainability is about more than just technology.
Well, the big dilemma for me is how to. I guess the larger point for me is that I don't think that the solution to this dilemma for the generation that gets it is going to be about exposing the technologies. I don't think so. And we've been sort of trained to think that's the way it's going to be. You know, that's the way that architecture traditionally moves forward. Exposes like that part because we think that the modern era is about exposing structure, like what it is about also the delivery. So in these projects, I'm trying to shift that to something else. I'm trying to ask, well, if it could be more precisely about how you experience space, or how your life gets slightly altered, or how just the way your normal day-to-day is disrupted towards a different subject matter. For example, I mean, what I like about the Bush House, the thing I like the most about it is that, I mean, it really moves, just stepping outside, you know, it's such a great idea, you know, just going, it's air conditioned here, and out there it is whatever is the natural condition. And that difference is just through this door. And that door is just this idea of private, that door trim, and I go out and there's a different world, no columns, just the view. Then you go back in again, that constant shifting, that's the hallway of your house. It's not that big a deal. It's not, it's not that abrupt or drifting, but it changes fundamentally the way the pattern, the rhythm, or the theoretical pattern, the rhythm, the way you live your life, what you focus on, what you attend to, how your day transpires, and so forth. So that's what I'm struggling with tonight, to try to get that to working. What I don't like is, then you get back to this, what I don't like about this, in fact, that's not true here. Right now, all of a sudden, once again, it's just an air-conditioned box. The technologies work just fine. I have all the means at my disposal to once again make it a problem, but just do it better. Does that make sense? Like, I think of these things as like prophylactic in a way, and that the other thing, the old house, I just find it more. I mean, it's kind of funny. This house, there's so many things about this house that I love this house. I love it. For me, it's this thing that was getting at something about a way of trying to move a normative lifestyle in a certain direction. And one of the sad things about the house is that when it was finished, it was going to be published in August of 2011. The architectural record put on the cover. They're going to do a big article about systems and how it worked. And then September 11th happened, and it just disappeared. The house just vanished. There were no photographs of it. It was never published. It was never. And in fact, for me, it was really strange because I have friends and they'd call, and the Bushmen would go out and they wouldn't even have themselves photographed in front of the house. They would have themselves photographed in front of this old farmhouse on the property. And it was terrible enough that 9/11 happened. It was even more for me personally that I couldn't publish this thing. But this friend would call me and say, David, it's bad enough that you're working for Bush's, well, matter of opinion, whatever. But the house sucks, as they would say. Because they've been looking at this photograph of this little farmhouse, and that's not the house. And they go, no, that's not that. It says right here, that's not the house. We're like, show us the house. I can't show you the house. It's like terrible. It's really awful. And I have another question. Yes?
This might be a little bit off topic of sustainability, but it was something that you were saying a lot. You said trigger a lot. And I was just wondering, what do you consider a trigger? How do you design a trigger? What does that mean to you when you say trigger?
Yeah, so what I was trying to show you here are examples of, so if you think about the fact that Madonna book, unlike the iPhone, it actually requires something to get you thinking about what it means. If you just look at it, then you know that's under the book.
Yeah.
As opposed to the beautiful iPhone. But if someone tells you it's not just sustainable, it is perpetually ecological, then it changes your definition of beauty. It becomes beautiful. Right? That's this big dilemma. Let's just say for Eric, beauty is non-formal. That beauty has to do with performance, has to do with form, which is this impossible thing in a studio, a design studio, to test, which is one of the reasons why I'm a professor as well. It's this huge dilemma to bring it into schools. Plus I love form. I'm a great formalist. I now love spectacular forms. It's a big dilemma. So in each of these instances, I'm trying to think about how, as you live your life, how can you tweak or alter some element of the building so that it starts getting you to focus on the natural world in each of these cases. So that's the trigger. So the trigger is taking something like that skylight and that wall that lights up, or just the fact that this house is pushed down to the ground. It looks completely normal, but when it rains, then all of a sudden you're in this hallway, and you see and perceive the hallway, you're in a room, or just the fact that you're driving through the neighborhood and you suddenly, where it was a house with a forest. I mean, those little triggers are meant to offer you, they're not trying to explain to you any technical performance about the building. They're trying to explain to you there's going to be interesting questions that the natural world or thinking about the natural world might open up for you. But they require triggers. Like the normal trigger system is a sign that says this, here, this explains that this place, the groundwater here once was, that's or on a lean building, you have to actually have signage that explains how the system works and you get points to that. Right? That is so frustrating. That idea that it has to be mediated that way. You can't get some mechanism to make that work. Look, I don't have a solution to it. That's why this is a speculative discussion, why I wanted to talk about this. Because it's what I'm struggling with in my own work, to try to get that thinking to happen without it having to be pointed to. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm a little bit confused. And on one hand, you're talking about sustainability. On the other hand, you seem to be talking about experiential architecture.
Yes.
And are you trying to negate one with the other, or is
No.
all the technology that you talk about becomes part of this? What exactly?
So this is a really big question, because the question was, there is technology on the one hand that is, my argument, that the profound revolution here is primarily technological, and there are other ones, there are certainly other linked ones, the triple bottom line thing. But the one I'm most interested in is the technological one, because that's the one that most directly impacts me as a design architect. But the things that I'm describing are all experiential, and that seems to be a contradiction. But my larger point is that the technologies are not ones that can ever be form driving. I mean, the easiest example is to think of the start of the modern era and the rise of the steel frame. The rise of the steel frame suddenly fundamentally alters form. But if I say to you, this is wasteful concrete, but in the next room, that is environmentally performative concrete, there's no distinct difference. Right? It's essentially an experiential condition as opposed to a formal condition. So the argument I'm trying to make in my own work is that the next generation of form has to engage experience instead of form as its primary subject. That's what it has to focus on. It has to do so through form. Form is the mechanism, but its subject matter is not form per se. Its subject matter is experience that form generates. So it seems to serve as a contradiction. The opposite would be to say, well, there is technology, we must try to expose that. But I don't know how to. I don't know how to tell you that this concrete floor is better than that one by something that I did to the form. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's so hard to do. There are some things that you can expose, like water systems or solar systems, or, I mean, every one of us has done those. You pull into a carport and the carport is solar panels. That's beautiful. It's about as far as you can go, you know, because, I mean, for what it's worth, this house was designed so that the roof would be perfect for solar, you know, I'm glad the solar's not there, because then it would have been like, it would have been like that. It would have been like a normal house with a sustainable backpack. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's the sustainable backpack part that I'm trying to avoid. So I'm actually glad we didn't put solar on it. I mean, they would have now, if they do it now, we've been talking about doing it, and it's going to be a solar farm elsewhere anyway, which is a smart way to do solar. Yeah, I mean, so the answer is, the question is correct. It's a contradiction, and it is the contradiction in which my best guess as a dinosaur of what the mammals are going to look like is that's what they're going to look like. And they're going to be very much experientially driven towards the environment in certain kinds of ways.
Am I allowed to ask a question? So I think that idea of sort of the ugly pet analogy is really appropriate to sort of working in the realm of residential architecture. And I wonder if that's maybe why, you know, you as an academic and a practitioner, you sort of focus that in that realm, because it really requires you to justify this sort of immediate agenda that you have against a client's sort of desire and agenda, rather than say, you know, any other sort of realm of architecture. And if that sort of informs the way you talk about your work as sort of really sort of moments of success, you don't talk about it.
Well, yeah, to be clear, to go 2 steps back in the story. So when I interned for Todd Williams and Bill Chen. That's what the office I worked for. And I went to that office, and they may have come to the video. They're incredibly handsome and like projecting people. Like you walk into a room with them, and they go, "I will do whatever they say." Right? And I went into that office, that would never be me, right? I would never be that person. I would never be able to, really by my presence, convince anyone of anything. But I'm really fascinated by practice, and so I'm really fascinated by ambitious practice and how you get ambitious buildings built. And I turn to my experience all the time to shape my aesthetic. It's not possible for me to sell someone on an idea like, it's going to be this. It's just not going to happen. It's not going to happen. But for me, all architecture is a profound negotiation. And that then becomes the interesting part. Right? The buildings I make are very, very different. And frequently, those negotiations set into place things that are absolutely impossible. Like, for example, I'm working on a commission right now in Denver. It has a 300-foot long, 4-foot wide corridor. That's not going to happen because it just got budgeted. But but yeah, that's just one of these things. It just arose because of a certain insistence on the client's part that there was no other way to solve this. And I'm like, that's really a bad idea. It's going to happen now. It was wider than that narrow and narrow, and it began to drop away. It was going to be a great space. Like ugly pet, right? Like it's got one really long arm. So we're going to make the adjustment. But so the thing that has happened for me as a consequence of practice is that my overarching ideas of a singular belief in architecture fall away. You know, I'm kind of, it's not that you can't have a unitary idea about how architecture creates value, but for me, it has to carry into place the idea that other people's realities are going to break into now, which is where the whole idea of the path comes up. Right? So if you say that the thing is not beautiful because of its pure form, it's beautiful because of the discourse that you have with people, and that discourse then includes larger other form-generating or form-activating ideas, then yeah, that's a kind of intriguing way to conceive. It's not particularly, there's some shortcomings to it. I mean, the shortcoming to it is that it doesn't get you to time. You know what I'm saying? Like it doesn't get you to certain really profound places that you could only get to if you just said, this is the way it's going to be. You know, but it's interesting. And so, but that's my lot. No comment, all ugly hats. I don't know if there are other questions, but I'm really grateful for